All right, so our scripture today is from the book of James in the 4th chapter, starting at verse 1 and going through verse 3, and then skipping over to verses 10 through 12. Listen for God's word. We're going to go through 7 through 10, so it may be a little different than you have on your screen. Anyway, James writes to those in his congregation about how they can better appropriate God's work and will among themselves. He talks about conflicts, those conflicts and disputes among you. Where do they come from, he asks? Do they not come from your cravings that are at war within you? You want something and do not have it, so you commit murder, and you covet something and cannot obtain it, so you engage in disputes and conflicts. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly in order to spend what you get on your pleasures. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning and your joy into dejection. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers and sisters. Whoever speaks evil against another or judges another speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not doers of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and to destroy. So who then are you to judge your neighbor? So ends the reading. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, I am so glad that Kate was able to share with us something from the Black Lives Matter march that took place here in Purcellville. Despite the ugliness of those gathered at the gun store and who were making a demonstration to those who were marching right in front of the gun store on the way from to the town hall. It was an uplifting event, and I especially actually have a picture of that place in my own mind that is really compelling, and it's why next week we're able to invite Chair Phyllis Randall and Police Chief Cynthia McAllister to be here, because that's where they actually met each other and got to know each other. And I remember well the moment when I saw the two of them together. Bonnie and Maria and Mia and I had started the march back there in the corner of Main and Maple? I forget the name of the street. And we had walked, and we kind of walked a little bit slowly. We weren't as quick as some of the people at the head of the march. And so as we marched on along, there were people on the side encouraging us and cheering us and the like. It was so nice. But I noticed from a distance that when we got up to Hatcher and Maine, that there was kind of a clump of people together. And I was kind of curious. And it seemed like there was a rise in volume of what was going on there. And so I was curious about it. We happened to be kind of on the left side of the street, and while the Purcellville Gun Shop was on the right side. And it was only when I got right there at the site of the gun store that things kind of opened up in the crowd, and I could see. And there were Phyllis Randall and Cindy McAllister and Buta Biberai, the Commonwealth attorney, all with their arms out extended, kind of like moms, just getting us to move along at their backs to people who were brandishing guns on the step of the gun shop, trying to threaten and intimidate the marchers that were going in front of them. But these three women, with their backs to those holding the guns, were saying, "Nothing to see here, keep on moving," and really began at that point to have a friendship, I think. As I've talked to Chair Randall about her visit to us next week, she remembered that time of being here at the march as the first time that she had met our Percival Police Chief, Cynthia McAllister, and says, I'm so glad to be able to come and to visit with her as we have this opportunity this coming Sunday a week from now. But as joyous as all this was, and it was like the young people and their enthusiasm, the young people who organized it. There was 5 guys who organized this, all about 20. As diverse as the crowd was, and Kate says there were hundreds, I kind of almost beg to differ, because I think I had been at the Leesburg March the week before, and I'd heard that there was 1,500 people. I thought there were more in the Percival March that week we had it. There was a rich diversity of different races and ethnicities, and young and old. It was just so wonderful to see all that kind of stuff, and especially to be in the presence of the 5 young guys. I call them the 5 guys who organized the event with all their enthusiasm. I was really blessed, actually, myself, to have a role in preparing for the march and working out some of the kinds of issues that needed to be addressed there. I was able to extend that invitation to Chair Randall to participate and to speak, and she did so wonderfully at the event, as did Chief McAllister. But also I was able to organize this Zoom meeting before the march that included people who are experienced at this kind of organization and what it can do to bring change and bring good. And I remember that meeting especially well. Actually, my friend, NAACP President Pastor Michelle Thomas, was on that call, among others. And she was really happy at the young people's enthusiasm, but also challenged us all to say, it's not that this march should just be a feel-good minute. And that is all that we get out of it. We got to make something more happen here. She asked, what is your ask? What is the thing you want to have happen? What's the policy change or the structural change that you would like to see from this march? And she challenged us. And I have to confess, those of us who were on the call were like, oh, I don't know. We didn't have really any kind of good thing. And I could hear her frustration at our lack of thoughtfulness about what it is that this march could do besides just help everybody feel a little bit better and to participate in something that was going on nationwide. I had the Zoom call here at my church office, and so I remember driving home and giving her a call after the meeting, knowing how frustrated she was, and then really heard how frustrated she was by what she shared with me about how she saw 4 different marches being organized around the county, and she was trying to get everybody together and collaborate and figure out what the purpose of these things were in a greater way, and was just feeling really frustrated that there was not that kind of collaboration going on, and especially in our march, because there was not even a thoughtfulness about whether we could ask for something. I tried to get her calmed down, but I couldn't. I remember ending the call with her very upset. And I called her back the next morning, and we were able to talk a little bit more. I don't know if she was going to participate in the march because she was so upset about that. And then later that afternoon, the worst things, in the midst of all her tension about these kinds of things, then came the call from friends of her son that something had happened to her son at the mouth of where the Goose Creek came together to the Potomac River. And then later that night, I heard the really tragic news that her son had passed away in a drowning at that place, that confluence park. And sorrow just multiplied on top of already the kinds of things that were so stressful about that. And Kate has already introduced the kind of the topic of today, and that is the allyship. And I was just feeling so much how challenging it was to be an ally. Now, not only to somebody who was trying to organize and do something in our community to bring about positive change, but now how she was hurting so bad and things, and something that is like the worst thing that can happen to any of us, to lose a child. That's what I want to get at, though, today, is this sense of what an ally is, as we use this term that's kind of a newly coined term, but I think is so helpful in this moment. Robin Given, cited by Kate, is also cited here in my sermon this morning about helping us to understand what an ally is by distinguishing it from what other times can be called a mentor or a champion or a supporter. A mentor, she writes, offers up knowledge and guidance to those less versed in a particular field. A champion sees your unique talent and helps put you in the spotlight. A supporter is there when you falter. But an ally? What does an ally do? An ally, Gibbons writes, and worth repeating, is just another human being muddling through life trying to be decent. We don't get a gold star for being a human being, but it is maybe our chief and highest calling nevertheless. And that's hard, because that means that I'm not going to rush out and be a mentor. I'm not going to be that champion. I'm not going to try to be a protector. I have this protection gene in me. You could ask Pastor Jessica if you ever talked to her about that. When there would be times when somebody would criticize Pastor Jessica, or if somebody said, we need to cut the budget, and would look at her salary line, my protection gene went into overdrive. And I would do many things that would, for me, was a way of trying to protect her and her ministry that she had here in our midst. And it's the same thing with anti-racism work. And I want to go into a situation where I am literally a white knight, rescuing, putting things right, speaking up, all those kinds of things. But it's just actually the wrong thing to do. In fact, as I've learned that I need to stop, sometimes the kinds of unconscious stereotypes and biases that are in my mind start to bubble up, and I see where I was not ready to actually speak in ways that would be helpful. I was not one who knew the language of things. It's kind of like I'm learning Spanish on Duolingo, and I, it's good for me to practice every day to do my Spanish, because someday I want to get back on that Camino de Santiago. But what I'm hoping is that my Duolingo Spanish gives me enough Spanish so that when I get into that full immersion experience, I can maybe have a little bit of a start, because I know I'm going to need to learn a lot more Spanish and how to do it conversationally when I'm on that path. And the same thing is true with the issues of race and racism. Black folks live with the issues of race and racism every day. It's something in front of them every day. As white folks, maybe this is really kind of what the dynamic is. We look at race as being something owned by people of color. And we look at ourselves and say, there is no race, because we're just normal. We're just regular. We're just what life is. That's kind of a challenging thing to consider. Ibram Kendi, a professor at American University, writes what it's like to, at least in his view, of being a black person and daily confronting this kind of dilemma. He says, to be American is to be white. And yet, if I try my very darndest to be white and so be an American, I'm just not white. And I have to live with that kind of dual consciousness of being a person of color, but also wanting to be an American, a human being, even greater than that. And on the flip side, the same is true for us who are white. Unless we, in some sense, become conscious of our whiteness, of our race, and so consciously understand that so that we can live in a diverse and more human kind of culture and society, we're missing out on what we should be doing. The moms in the Portland protest, who went out in front of the protesters and made a buffer between themselves, between the protesters and the federal agents who were on the street confronting them. The moms all wore yellow as a way of identifying themselves as moms who are interceding. But what they really wore was their whiteness, because they knew as white mothers, the police were not going to subject them to as much of a confrontation as they were to those African American protesters on the streets of Portland. That's the kind of dilemma I think that we live with the sense of trying to be an ally. An ally, as opposed to the other roles that we might choose, doesn't rescue. It doesn't use white superpower to protect. It shouldn't have it isn't one where you just have your black friends' backs in such a way that you can somehow rescue them from the dilemma because you're inserting your own privilege. In some sense, you're asserting that historical, systemic superiority of whiteness that we have told as our narrative in this country, instead of just being another human being muddling through life, trying to be decent. In this reading of James, I've skipped some parts of it, and I kind of wanted to go back to one part in chapter 3, starting at verse 1. James says, "Not many of you should aspire to be leaders, because if you're going to be a leader, you have to speak instead of sometimes being quiet and listening." And he says when we speak, oftentimes what comes out is not one kind of normative kind of thing, but it's blessing on one side of the mouth and cursing coming out of the other. And he says, how can this be? How can it be that a source of water, a well, could give both sweet water and brackish at the same time? And yet, while that can't come out of a mouth of a well, out of our mouth comes all these kinds of things. Poor Job, he had some really great friends when he was grieving, when he was diseased with things all over his skins, when he was now in poverty. Three friends just gathered and sat with him for, I think it was like 3 or 4 days. I can't remember exactly how long it was, but for a significant amount of time, and they were friends up until they opened their mouths and started to speak. And then their friendship was lost. I think an ally is kind of along those lines. It is one who is, yes, alongside, but also with a listening ear. And if there's any place to start in challenging our racism, it is with our listening. It's not just that I hear you, I hear myself. And kind of what's in my own head as I listen to what's going on with you, and as I listen to my own thoughts and attitudes. I don't want to have a destructive dynamic of mistakenly having some kind of moral gift to offer out of a moral superiority. Actually, it's been so wonderful that we've had our wonderful friends come, Ron Campbell and Phil Thompson and Donna Bohannon, who have come and shared so generously with us of their kind of understandings of life and how they can help us who are white to better understand our own kinds of challenges that we need to address. They've helped us to listen. I hope that you have had that sense of listening. In James 4, in today's reading, we're asked to humble ourselves before the Lord, and in turn, God will lift us up. I think listening is a way of humbling ourselves before God. When we listen to others, we take time to hear their stories, their dilemmas, their hopes and dreams, suspending our attention to our own while we attend to them. Listening and paying attention to the other is actually what the essence of love is about. So when we're called to love our neighbor as ourselves, listening, paying attention to the other is the foundation for that. And what do we do by learning to do this kind of listening? We re-examine our own presuppositions, wondering how we thought so narrowly before. We put aside our privileged way of living because there's a better way of living as those who share life with others rather than as those who hoard it and keep it for ourselves. We get to be just another human being muddling through life trying to be decent.